In the aftermath of the First World War, the European landscape was shattered. A generation of young men was dead, and entire towns had been reduced to jagged stone. The victorious powers sought retribution. At the Palace of Versailles in 1919, they imposed a settlement that forced Germany to surrender territory, dismantle its military, and accept complete responsibility for the conflict. The treaty also demanded massive financial reparations, an obligation designed to cripple the German economy. To pay these debts, the Weimar Republic printed money until the currency collapsed. By 1923, hyperinflation was so severe that a wheelbarrow full of marks could not buy a loaf of bread, and children built pyramids out of bundled, worthless banknotes in the streets. A brief period of stabilization followed, but it evaporated with the global stock market crash of 1929. German unemployment skyrocketed, eventually leaving a quarter of the labor force without work. 2 decades of compounding economic trauma and national humiliation hollowed out the moderate center of German politics. The public lost faith in the democratic institutions that seemed incapable of solving the crisis, leaving millions desperate for a radical alternative. Adolf Hitler stepped into that void. He built the Nazi Party, promising to tear up the Versailles Treaty, resurrect the economy, and restore German dominance. He weaponized a popular conspiracy theory, the stab-in-the-back myth, which falsely claimed the German military had not been defeated on the battlefield in 1918, but had been betrayed at home by politicians and the Jewish population. The party demanded total ideological conformity. Their domestic and foreign policies were driven by anti-Semitism, severe militarization, and the pursuit of Lebensraum, living space to be conquered in the East for an Aryan master race. Pacing speeds up slightly. In 1933, the political elite appointed Hitler as Chancellor, believing they could control him. Instead, he rapidly suspended civil liberties, outlawed opposition parties, and centralized absolute power. The Democratic Republic was gone. Germany transformed into an ideological weapon before the first shots were fired, as the regime methodically erased the boundary between civilian life and military ambition. Hitler immediately tested international boundaries. He reintroduced military conscription, remilitarized the Rhineland, and in 1938 annexed Austria under the threat of force, moves that were met with enthusiastic salutes from crowds eager for a greater Germany. Fearing another war, European leaders attempted to placate him. At the 1938 Munich Agreement, Britain and France allowed Germany to absorb parts of Czechoslovakia in exchange for a promise of peace. Hitler accepted the territory, then broke the agreement entirely months later. To secure his eastern flank, he negotiated a secret non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, dividing Eastern Europe into spheres of influence and removing the immediate threat of a two-front war. On September 1, 1939, German troops shattered the border barrier into Poland. 2 days later, Britain and France declared war. The invasion introduced a new doctrine of mechanized combat, Blitzkrieg. Tanks equipped with radios bypassed static defensive lines entirely, moving with relentless, coordinated speed. After securing Poland, the German war machine turned west, sweeping through the Low Countries and overwhelming French forces. By June 1940, German soldiers were marching through Paris. These rapid victories removed any remaining caution among the Nazi leadership. The ease of their early conquests convinced them that their forces were invincible and their strategy infallible. That hubris led to the fatal pivot of June 1941, Operation Barbarossa. 3 million German troops launched a massive, surprise invasion of the Soviet Union. German military intelligence expected the Soviet state to collapse under a single, violent blow, entirely underestimating the resilience of the Soviet population. Hitler waged a war of annihilation on the Eastern Front, targeting what he called Judeo-Bolshevism through mass executions and the intentional starvation of millions of prisoners and civilians. The military advance provided cover for systematic murder. Behind the front lines, mobile death squads known as Einsatzgruppen began executing hundreds of thousands of Jewish civilians. By January 1942, at a villa in the Berlin suburb of Wannsee, high-ranking government officials met to formalize and streamline the logistics of mass murder across the continent. This diagram illustrates the terrifying scale of the final solution. It outlines a logistical network to locate, transport, and murder 11 million individuals. The entire apparatus of a modern state was repurposed to operate high-capacity killing centers in occupied Poland. The systematic destruction of the Jewish people remained the central, defining objective of the Nazi regime, transcending every other military or strategic priority. But the invasion of the Soviet Union stalled. Brutal winter conditions and relentless Soviet counteroffensives slowly bled the advancing forces. In early 1943, the remnants of the German Sixth Army surrendered in the ruins of Stalingrad. The illusion of military supremacy was broken. The following year, the Western Allies launched Operation Overlord. British, American, and Canadian troops executed a massive amphibious assault on the beaches of Normandy, opening a second front. Germany was now trapped. The Wehrmacht faced an industrialized, overwhelming assault from the west, while the Red Army pushed relentlessly from the east. Rather than retreat and consolidate, the regime's ideological fanaticism blinded it to reality. Even as supply lines collapsed and the military faced total defeat, the Nazi government continued diverting precious trains, personnel, and resources to sustain the mechanics of the Holocaust. The Third Reich collapsed in violence. By the spring of 1945, Soviet forces fought street by street through the ruins of Berlin, forcing the surrender of the remaining German command. As Allied troops advanced across Europe, they liberated the concentration and extermination camps, exposing the absolute depths of the state's depravity to a shocked global public. The human cost was staggering. Tens of millions of soldiers and civilians were dead. Ancient cities were reduced to ash, and entire populations were permanently scarred by displacement and genocide. The German state under fascism carried a fatal structural flaw. Built entirely on a foundation of perpetual aggression, racial hierarchy, and absolute militarism, the system required constant expansion simply to survive. It was mathematically and politically guaranteed to eventually consume itself. The ruins of 1945 leave a definitive record. Extremist ideologies built on racial hatred and absolute dictatorial control do not deliver national revival. They end, inevitably, in total annihilation.